that sort of vibe. So, thank you. Welcome to the next session. The next session is focused on education. For our first speaker today, we have Mitch. Mitch is one of our PhD students at Monash, who's been helping us develop various teaching tools. And today he's going to showcase two of them. So please welcome Mitch to the stage.
Thanks very much. Hi everyone. So I've been working a lot on scalable teaching lately, and a lot of that scalability, of course, comes from teaching online. And the motivation for this, of course, is that I do quite a lot of teaching. I did a couple of workshops yesterday, if you were there with me. And I also create a lot of tools. So it kind of goes hands in hand that I want to create some tools to help my teaching. And I'm also looking at trying to give automated feedback because I don't really like marking that much. I don't think any tutor, once they've done a couple of years of marking, looks forward to marking the next assignment. So I've created a couple of tools to help me both marking at scale and also assessing students at scale. And the first of which I'll talk about is moodlequiz. This is about making quizzes easier in Moodle, and this is for assessing the theory of this course of the questions. And then, of course, I teach a lot of code, so I need a way to test the code as well. And I've got a little Quarto extension here called quarto-webr-teachr, which is about online code exercises using code in the browser, WebR, and automated feedback. So a little bit of metaprogramming for those that were in my class yesterday. So first, Moodle quiz. Why Moodle? I use it at Monash, so I need it for myself. I want to make my own life easier. But Moodle is great because it's free and open source, and my work is also free and open source. So that goes hand in hand, making the tool more accessible for everyone to work with. And compared to other learning management systems, I think Moodle is quite good. It's not as modern. The newest version looks okay, a bit better, much rounder. But compared to the horror stories from other teachers that I hear around that aren't using Moodle, I'm quite grateful that we use Moodle at Monash. What I hate doing in Moodle is creating quizzes. If you've tried to create a quiz in Moodle, it's a bit arduous. It's very clicky. And as a programmer, I hate clicking. I like typing. So if I wanted to add a question, then I need to add another question, a new question, and then I've got a lot of options. I have a short answer. I click add. There's a whole process, and it's new page after new page. I've got to have some names of the question, the text of the question, and then I've got all the options of the questions. I've got to add a few more questions. It sucks. This takes so much time, and I wanted to make it a bit easier to use. And of course, I love literate programming. We all like our R markdowns and quartos, and Jupyter notebooks perhaps. And this is because it allows us to write both the code and the text in the same place. And I wanted to bring the same tool for creating questions alongside my text for the question. So I wanted to use code to generate these quizzes alongside plots and other data analytics outputs that I want them to look at. So statistics and education, literate programming, they kind of go hand in hand. It's a great match. And it's also nice because a lot of the students that are learning with these tools can then see the code and see how it was made and kind of appreciate that I'm practicing what I preach, that literate programming can save the day. This isn't a new idea by any means. A few of you might have heard of the exams package. If you've been using R for a while, it's been on CRAN for 15 years, and Moodle quiz is definitely a newcomer. There's a lot of good documentation for R exams, but it doesn't follow the literate programming principles so closely. The placement for the quizzes is kind of spread across the entire file. It's not in place where you'd expect it or want it to be. So it's a little bit better than Moodle quiz in the fact that it's more general. You can, if you're stuck with Canvas or Blackboard or other LMSs, it can export there. I'm focusing just on Moodle quiz. And each question, often I create a quiz with a dozen questions. I've been using it to create exams lately at Monash because we use Moodle for our exams online too. Each question requires separate files and it becomes this huge project just to manage it. It's a much better step than Moodle itself directly, but it's still a bit of a pain to work with in my experience. So here's what I mean by that. This is the R exams examples. So I might have an example chunk for generating some data, maybe make a box plot or a histogram with this. And then I've got these questions and solutions in a list structure. But right at the end, then I've got the question separate from my code. So I've got my display, my R markdown that's going to be presented, and my questions are at the end of the document, not in text, where I'm thinking about asking the question. And then the solutions are an entirely separate chunk or section of the R markdown, and the meta information, so what type of question it is, the name of the question, the categories, is separate sections for every question type. I wasn't that thrilled with that design, but it does produce a really lovely output if you can work through it. So that code made this close style question. It's fill in the blanks, or in text you click through. But the answers for this close type are expressed at the bottom, whereas the questions are halfway through. So there's this disconnect between answer and question. So hopefully I can convince you, if you are using exams or if you're using Moodle and not using literate programming for it yet, to try out Moodlequiz. It uses a more principled approach to literate programming for embedding questions inside of an R markdown file. So the closed type question that I featured before is what it's really made for, but you can also do essay style, multiple choice, all the usual types as well. Downsides, of course, it's only for Moodle XML because I only use Moodle. If someone else is doing Blackboard or Canva and wants to make it work for that, you're welcome to. Pull requests accepted. It's starting to mature. We've used it a few years now, but I still might make breaking changes. And so it's only on GitHub yet, but I expect it's almost ready to put on CRAN. How it works is gone. So let's go to R. So we have a new Moodlequiz output here, a new output format. And unlike most formats that you'd use R Markdown or Quarto for, this is producing an XML. So it's a bit strange, but Moodle likes to import XMLs. It's the most natural thing for it to do. And I can do random replications as well. So if I wanted to give each student a different data set or a different sample, I could do that with randomness inside my R Markdown file and just generate this document, this question set, a dozen times, or one for each student. Each question is separated by a header level 2. So here is my introduction question, and this is just going to introduce the penguins. We all love the Palmer penguins dataset. There's no questions here, it's just setting up the dataset and showing them what code was provided. But you'll see how it embeds the results of this nicely in the Moodle form. Where I put questions could be with inline chunks. So this is a closed style question. The average weight of a penguin is what? And I'm just calculating this from the data set itself. But if you wanted, you could just write the average weight was 10 with a tolerance, like so. It's not that, it's 4,000 something. And I've gone through and added a few questions for them to look at the output above, which was the summary table, and produce the answer and various tolerances with this. You can also do it for fill in the blank code. So here's a drop down where you've got all the options of column names, and to produce this plot, what was on the x-axis, what was on the y-axis. The same approach applies where you just use inline R chunks or R code. And then lastly, at the end, I've got an essay type question. So if you wanted to do something that isn't a close or just some text describing the quiz, you can specify any Moodle question type here. And then in additional options, you can add the total marks, for example, up at the top. I forget the exact schema of this. It's on the Moodle documentation for the XML. So if I knit this document, it should be pretty quick. It will generate that XML, and I can import it into Moodle, and I'll get a nicely formatted HTML Moodle style, Markdown style, cross-reference links, all the good stuff you come to expect. So, wrong folder. Demo. So it's generated this XML. You can see the time there. It's live and real. And instead of going question by question, I can add it to my question bank. So you might have imported questions before to go from semester to semester. This generates some questions to import. Click on import. Very good. My Docker container for Moodle is struggling a bit. Import Moodle XML. Drag that across, import. And that's brought in all the questions, but it's also set up the complex close substitution stuff. If you created that by hand before, it's a bit painful. So here's my questions. Instead of adding them one by one with multiple clicks, I'm going to click Add from Question Bank. And it's created for me a penguins category. So that was based on my category at the very top. So I can import all of the questions in one go from that category. So select all the questions to add, and my quiz is complete. So I'll preview the quiz here. That's not the button I wanted. Preview quiz. So what I get is my very nice Markdown inspired, nicely formatted display. Exactly what you would normally see in HTML brought into Moodle. So this was my introduction question. There's no questions to ask here, so it's automatically information. But going further down, I've got all these fill in the blanks that we're talking about with those closed style questions. I can drop down and I get all the different column names that exist. I can answer it all. And it will also automatically tell you the answer as well. So if I peel behind, look at what was generated, editing this question. It's put in all of these closed style substitutions that Moodle uses, which can get quite arduous to write out, like these multi-choice. And if I preview it, put in all the answers, and I'll make one of these wrong. So maybe, oops, check my answers. I can get part by part feedback on what was right and wrong. And you can see that one was incorrect. And I can give individual feedback as well inside that close function to say why that particular answer was right or wrong. Okay, so that's Moodle quiz. I have big ambitions for this. I want to make a Quarto template, of course. Other people can support other LMS if they want. And I really want to add WebR so that you can run R inside Moodle for our exams. I think that would be a bit cheeky. Might upset the admin staff, but I want to bring R code to our exams, and I think that's a nice way to do it. So speaking of WebR, I'm going to rush through this one. We also had a problem with trying to teach everyone R before they come to our classes, so that we weren't teaching R over and over again for each of our repeated units as they progress through the degree. And everyone's R skills were varying very much, but we only needed a basic level of understanding. So I set out to fix this, and I created packages like moodlequiz. But then we also looked at adapting the Spacey course template by Innes, which is an online code execution for Spacey, natural language processing. And that was quite nice. And we made learner.numbat.space, which runs code in the browser using remote servers. So it's using binder.org to run the code. So this was the team. Rob, I put manager here. He just said yes when we asked for money. Emmy was organizing quite a lot, and Danyang and Jessica were helping create content with me for this first website. So here's how it looked. And you can go into each of these chapters, and what you'll find is some code exercises. Maybe that's the wrong one to try. Code exercises here, which you can change and run and check. But the problem here is that every time you run a code, or when you first go on the website, you need to spin up a Docker container on a remote server on Binder, and it takes up to 2 minutes. Once it's started, it will be a bit faster, but we're very reliant on a remote service to make this work. So was our problem solved? Yes. A lot of the students came to class much more prepared, and if they weren't, we said, go to the website, learn it yourself, come back. But it started to grow problems. We started to grow old of this. It took a while to launch, as I mentioned. It needs an internet connection. We are relying on my binder to continue to exist, and that's not a guarantee. And we've used more than 50% of all of my binder at times, and I think we're abusing the service. So out came WebR recently, and WebR is the magic bullet here. This is running code not on a remote server somewhere, but on every student's own computer, but still having all the niceness of running it in the browser. So we don't have any issues with setting up, installing R, and making sure the packages are the right versions. This is a reproducible environment where we can use teaching materials or give them teaching materials and exercises to complete. So we had a few more people join the team, Cynthia, and then we also had Kristina and Tasha help create or convert those exercises into the new Quarto format. And we've started rewriting Learner to use WebR instead. And it's not quite ready, it's very early work in progress, it's coming soon. But here's how it looks. The website's there if you wanted to tinker, but it's the same idea. You can run code, check code, but it's now much faster. It's not on a remote server. And much more sustainable as well. I've used this for my forecasting workshops at USAR. So I created a bunch of exercises here, which you can fill in the blank, check your answers. It's going to run this code, create the symbol. And this slowness is actually just running it on my browser, running it on my computer right now. Maybe a different example would be nicer. Show solution. Oh, it's executing now. It's probably loading FPP3. I'm not sure why it's taking some time. Maybe because I'm doing a demo. Oh, there we go. Just loading some packages. And it gives me instant feedback based on a few different features of what I've given it. So the way I've done this is in a regular chunk, but see how the answer and the prompt is in the same place. The first part is what is starter code, and it's a fill in the blanks. So with this double angle bracket, I can have a blank with the show solution. So it'll immediately show me the rolling the dice between 1 and 6, how to roll a dice. And then underneath the question marks is where I check the answer. And I check the answer in a variety of ways. I give hints based on if these conditions are true. So I can give targeted feedback based on where they made mistakes. And that feedback is based on 3 things. First of all, the results, if it made the right model, made the right plot, outputted the right text. So you can check the printed objects to see if that's the case. But also if they've given an error, a warning, or a message, maybe you want to see that. You can also check if they've raised warnings as well. The difficulty here is that results in a chunk, you might have multiple things printed, and you'll need to check all of them. You might also check the inputs. So yesterday in my advanced R, we were talking about metaprogramming, how to investigate code. This is where you can use metaprogramming to see if they've used the right functions that you've asked them to. Maybe they've added some comments in the right style. You can check the style and structure of their code by looking at the input code. And then lastly, you can check the environment. Maybe they've used random number generation. Maybe they've saved a file to disk. You can look at that as well. Okay, so there's a few examples here, and it's running in the browser in my slides as well. So here I can put the solution. I can check my answer, and it rolled the dice of 3. I can roll the dice multiple times here. But if I make a mistake and maybe say 0 to 6, I'm a 0 indexer, and try to check my answer, I get targeted feedback. My function is rolling less than 1. Of course, if I go more than 6 as well, now I get 2 problems. Less than 1, more than 6. You can also check the environment. So what if I was cheeky and just said, it's a function that always gives 4. How do I check for that? It's between 1 and 6. So I'll always get a number between 1 and 6. But if I check it this time, well, it's not an integer. Let me fix that. It should randomly select it because it's checking the RNG state. If the random seed is changed, then it will pass this test. So that's checking the environment. Lastly, I can check some inputs. So maybe I use, what's a good example of this? I'm expecting them to use sample here. Did I have a nice demo? Maybe I use runif 1 times 6. This probably won't work. And then round it. Random number between 0 and 1 and round it. And now it's telling me I should use sample instead of the sample function as shown in class. That's a much better solution to rolling a dice. And then lastly here, if I did do the sample size of 1 without making this the integer, I can use metaprogramming. I can still give the right answer. Yes, you got it right. But it's better to use integers, 1L, instead of 1. I've seen that we've used a double instead of an integer, and I can give that targeted feedback. So this is more of code style based on what was written in the code. And there's some functions to help you do this, like search AST, which will do that recursion, look for the functions, rather than writing these loops yourself. To finish, I wanted to introduce Quarto Live a little bit, which I think is the successor of this project that I've just sold you on. Quarto Live was only recently released, unfortunately like a month after I finished this one, and it's much better. So of course it's better because I don't have to maintain it. George from WebR is looking after it, and it also supports Python by Pyodide. And it has a lot of the same inspiration as what I had when creating WebR-teachr. Specifically, it allows you to automatically check the code using the output, the input, and the environment with various elements here. The style of it is in different chunks rather than the same chunk with some question marks. That's just sugar syntactic stuff. It depends on personal preference. I'm sure you could wrap it up in use this same design as well. But the same ideas of how we test code by looking at the results, the inputs, and the environment can also be applied for Quarto Live, should I say. So it's definitely a watch this space. It's an exciting time. Everything's evolving quite rapidly. So this is really powered by WebAssembly being widely adopted, and you can expect to see more R and Python goodness in the browser to come. So finally, you should test both theory and code when you're doing your assessments. That's why I want to have R code in our exams, somehow embedded in Moodle. And give small automated quizzes rather than big ones that are arduous for your tutors, so you can track progress throughout the semester. And I think WebR is just so fun. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mitch. That's quite a lot of useful tools there. We have a few minutes for questions, so we'll start over here.
What's the future of teachr now there's a Quarto Live?
As in our rewrite of teachr?
As in, are you going to develop it further? Are you going to generalize it to other languages? Or what's your plan for teachr?
The Quarto extension?
Yeah.
That's right. So the question, what am I going to do with this Quarto extension? I'm going to abandon it and sell them to, you should try a Quarto Live, it's going to be much better for you. Because I don't want to maintain one extra project, especially if there's going to be a better one made by someone else.
Which will the work with the ggplot?
Yes, and it'll also work with interactive graphics. So if you've got eCharts or Plotly, the WebR-teachr might struggle a little bit with the interactive elements like Leaflet, but Quarto Live works excellently with that.
I love it, Mitch. Like, it's so creative. Can definitely see how I could use it. What do you reckon my overhead is for getting into it time-wise? Like, how long does it take me to do this if I want to convert an existing quiz into what's the spin-up time for me?
For Moodlequiz?
Yeah.
I would think it's very low because you're writing Markdown, and Markdown is quite efficient to convert just a chunk of text that you can copy from an existing quiz into Markdown. You just need to add some of the syntax around it. So top-level headers to separate the questions, maybe use bold and format it a bit nicer. I think the main cost there, you might be tempted to do even more with it. Add some plots, add some tables, give code exercises for fill in the blanks. There's not much cost, especially if you already know R Markdown and Quarto.
This is amazing, and it was really cool to see you go from how hard that first example was on both of your examples to how easy it looked. The one thing that jumped out to me is suddenly when you're allowing this kind of functionality, which is incredible, now the challenge is teaching the teachers to think about programming, because you showed like a number of ways it could be broken by someone being extra clever. So just like thinking about that as a challenge for the future, that'll be like documentation and teaching. Like, what are your thoughts about how hard it is to explain that to people who want to use this tool?
Yeah, so one thing I should clarify almost, a lot of the uses that I use for this, moodlequiz, I do weekly assessments. There's no grade associated with this. It's just for their own learning and their own self-assessment to see if they're tracking and if they're up to date. And our students really appreciate that. The WebR online, the exercises, they're just learning it for themselves. There's no reason to cheat the system. But when we do it for our exams, we just use that as the capture device. We mark it ourselves manually, and you'd have to do a lot more work to really defensively check if they've done the exact right thing. And that's a hard challenge. And it's unfortunately not enough to go through in the 20, 30 minutes I have. But the ideas of checking all things, inputs, outputs, and environment, if you do all three, you're going to be much closer to making sure they're doing exactly what you wanted. And it's definitely a big education piece for the educators necessary for what you should look for and how it could be broken.
All right, final question over there.
Thanks, Mitch. This looks super slick. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on, I noticed with using WebR that it has to download like every single R package. Does that happen every time? And like, are there considerations for say if someone has a slow internet speed or like something like that? Is it going to download like hundreds of megabytes of packages every time they open up an R session?
So WebR is compiled down to a much smaller package size than it would normally be. I think R itself is down to 4 megabytes from 70 or 80. Individual packages it's not going to install all of CRAN. It's only going to install the packages that you need for that exercise on that web page. So that's a bit of a design question as well. You saw it took a little while for me to run that exercise because I brought in FPP3. And that brings in all of tidyverse and it brings in all of the forecasting stuff, whereas I only needed civil in order to show that demo. Later on I needed more, but it would be much faster if I used less dependencies in that example. So I would suggest when you create your exercise, don't use too many packages. Instead of loading all of tidyverse, just load dplyr if that's all you needed.
Cool, thanks.
All right, well, thanks everyone for the questions, and thanks Mitch for the presentation.
Thank you.